One of the most heartbreaking scenes in the 1972 film Jeremiah Johnson happens when the title character rushes home while fearing for the lives of his wife, named the Swan, and their adopted son Caleb. When he gets home, he finds he's already too late to save them. Why did this happen? Why did warriors of the Crow tribe end the lives of a Native American woman and a child? You might think the family was punished for intruding on tribal burial grounds. But that explanation was added by the screenwriters. You won't find it in the 1965 novel Mountain Man, or in the 1958 biography Crow Killer. Let's read what these books have to say. Threading his approach toward the grove of aspens at the edge of the clearing, dropping finally to his hands and knees for the last few yards, he came at last to where he could see his cabin. He noted the dead silence. He felt the absence of life, in cabin or corral. Looking intently at the rock floor in front of the cabin, he saw bones. The clean-picked skull of the Flathead girl lay near the open cabin door, a little apart from the remainder of her bones. Nearby, Johnston spotted a small round object, the skull of a child, about the size of an orange, all but disintegrated by the sharp claws of the birds of prey. "Two was killed here," he muttered. So you can see the differences from the movie, that the child was not an adopted son from an earlier attack, but was the unborn child of the Swan and Jeremiah Johnson. The book also explains why he left them for the winter. He was going, she knew, into the Uintas, a sub-range of the Rocky Mountains, for beaver and mink. He would return when the spring's rush of melting snows subsided. The Swan carefully loaded his pack horses, and Johnston saddled his black 2-year-old. He mounted the black, took the lead reins in hand, and rode off down the valley. She stood and watched until he was out of sight, then turned and went into the cabin. After returning in the spring and finding their cabin raided, as he sat in grief, Johnson realized what had probably happened. Through the long, cold winter, perhaps she looked too anxiously for his coming. Perhaps she sat too long looking downriver, toward the bend in the trail where she had last seen him. The Crow warriors who surprised her came from upriver, from the mountains to the cabin's rear. A score of young, untried braves on an expedition which was to bring years of grief upon their nation. Presumably, they rode single file down the shelf of the flooded river's bank. They could not have seen the cabin from any great distance in that rough terrain. When they did see it, they likely split up, dismounted, and reconnoitered among the rocks. The Swan, it seems sure, sat out of doors as the young crows secreted their horses and applied war paint. They waited well hidden until she stepped for a moment into the cabin. When she reappeared, they were ready. Perhaps she saw the first freshly painted face from the moment it appeared around the corner of the cabin, and she could neither escape nor fight off the warriors. Or perhaps she sensed the Absaroka, or crow, only as his tomahawk was raised above her. A war whoop rang out over the valley. The tomahawk thudded in the back of her neck. She fell sideways off the bench. Her killer took her scalp. What does this have to do with Crow burial grounds? The 1935 book, The Crow Indians, describes burial and mourning customs, but only one restriction is specified. The taboo against mentioning the name of a dead person was probably less rigid than in some other Indian tribes. However, it was certainly not proper to speak it before the deceased person's kin, except while those present were smoking. So if the cause was not about trespassing sacred burial grounds, was it just pure malice? The 1965 novel Mountain Man describes the brutality of the American frontier when the title character first looks on the family that was destroyed by Blackfeet warriors. In the world where he now lived, the killing of the weak by the strong was the first law of life, all the way from the tiniest gnats and spiders up to the wolf, the elk bull, and the grizzly. No day passed in which he did not see creatures killing other creatures. No day passed in which his enemies did not look at him and covet his flesh. This was not a country for persons dedicated to the prevention of cruelty by the living on the living. This harsh reality did not keep him from wondering why Crow warriors had attacked his family specifically. Perhaps the one warrior who, years ago, had tried to steal his bowie knife had trailed him. Or perhaps it had been a war party of foolhardy youngsters, eager to count coup, or touch an enemy, and kill. Native American warfare is briefly described in the 2004 book, Making Native American Hunting, Fighting, and Survival Tools. A common reason for battle was to steal women and horses, and to seek revenge for insults. Some warfare was waged over goods and wealth, and quite a lot of warfare was precipitated by the trespassing of traditional tribal lands by other tribes. It's hard to believe one woman and a child in an isolated cabin presented much of a threat, so there must have been more to the attack than competition for resources. One of the most important reasons for warfare was honor. In many instances, a young man was not considered an adult and was not allowed to marry until he had gone on the warpath. A similar system existed in the bachelor brigades of the Zulu tribe in 19th century southern Africa. Especially among the Plains tribes, a code of honor was followed. There were different honors for stealing horses and women, scalping, and even killing an enemy. In the 1963 book, The Saga of Hugh, on which the novel and movie The Revenant are based, seems to back up that last suggestion. Indians were apt to welcome any opportunity to lift hair, that of women and children being as welcome as any other, when they were in the mood. Especially dangerous to ill-armed strays were young bucks eager to prove themselves. Chiefs anxious to supply the wherewithal of a scalp dance, or a disappointed war party on the lookout for any face-saving prize. The lot of captured women was, it is true, generally an easy one. That is, they were married to Crow men and merely performed the usual feminine tasks. Why wasn't Swan taken captive? Maybe they saw that she was already pregnant and decided it was easier to just take her scalp than deal with another man's child. Then why was trespassing on the burial grounds added to the story as a reason to end Swan's life? I propose the screenwriters added this plot device so that modern audiences could make sense of it. So that audiences didn't just say, they killed her for no reason. Which also reduces the risk of portraying Native Americans as savage and warlike. This stereotype is described in the 2016 book, All the Real Indians Died Off, and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. Chapter 5 is actually titled, Myth 5, Indians Were Savage and Warlike. Let's skip over the word savage, because it has so many definitions and subjective interpretations. But the word warlike does seem to apply to our current discussion. The chapter starts with a quote from Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. He, King George, has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. The author goes on to say, Indians had been drawn into the struggles for land and power among the colonizing empires. And this sometimes occurred within a context of ongoing conflict between the Indian nations themselves. Indigenous peoples were not pacifists, but their very different military styles reflect dramatically different reasons for fighting compared to Europeans. In the Great Plains, while there is some archaeological evidence for pre-contact, high-casualty warfare in a few regions, low-intensity warfare was the norm. Mostly raiding and captive-taking, Indians fought essentially to maintain social or economic stability, not, as Europeans did, to control others or to expand their settlements. I'm going to have to disagree with that last statement. Considering how the Chippewa tribe displaced the Sioux tribe from the American Midwest, before the Sioux displaced the Crow and Pawnee tribes in the mountains and Great Plains. But either way, by the end of Chapter 5, the book does not deny that Native Americans were warlike, but instead claims that Europeans were more warlike, fighting on a bigger scale with more killing efficiency, which is a fair statement. So what is the takeaway from all this? That life is hard and then you get scalped? No, I'd say that life is precious and needs to be cherished. Take care of the people you care about, and enjoy what time you do have with them, as long as you can. Thank you for watching. Please like this video and see links in the description below to watch Jeremiah Johnson and read Mountain Man.